It's been a while since I've talked about the Toronto Raptors, so I thought for the occasion, obviously red background, red shirt, even my cheeks are a little bit red from sunburn. So I thought I'd go all out because it has been a while, and in that time period, quite a lot has happened. I mean, they drafted Scottie Barnes instead of Jalen Suggs, like a lot of us thought would happen, and I'm not saying that's a bad pick. No. I'll talk about that in a bit, of course. They re-signed Gary Trent Jr. They traded Kyle Lowry, arguably the greatest Raptors player of all time. That's what some people would say. I'm going to leave that up for you guys to decide, seeing as you've been through the ups and the downs and the ups and the downs. Yeah. The usual tendencies of being a fan of an NBA team. That's what you've done. So you can decide who you think is the greatest Raptors player of all time. But regardless of that, Kyle Lowry will have a statue at some point in time. He deserves one, and well, he's now gone. So a lot has changed. This is a very, very different Raptors team to the one we've seen in the past 10 years, just for the fact that Kyle Lowry is no longer there and the fact they've made some other moves as well, including Scottie Barnes and players of that nature. But before I even get into that, as always, if you could drop a like on the video, that would be much appreciated. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. It just helps out a ton. That would be cool. So let's talk about it, because we may as well just talk about Scottie Barnes. Or should we talk about the trade? We'll talk about the trade quickly, because farewell to Kyle Lowry. Obviously, as I said, one of the greatest Raptors player of all time, maybe the greatest. Who cares right now? That's a discussion for a different day for Raptors fans to have, not for me to have. But Kyle Lowry, Goran Dragic, Precious Achiuwa, and straight off the bat, you get back Goran Dragic, who, if you want to keep, he will help you on your playoff push, which I think this team is still a playoff level team. I'll talk about that as well. I'll get into depth on that as well. But I think he'll help your push on being a playoff team, coming off the bench, giving you the same kind of spark he gave for Miami for so many years, and continued to do even still into his 30s. But there's also trade suitors. I think the Dallas Mavericks immediately come to mind for obvious reasons. The Slovenian connection. There isn't too many times you're going to have a Slovenian connection like Luka Doncic and Goran Dragic, so I'm sure they would love to play with each other. And maybe the likes of Jalen Brunson and Dwight Powell for contracts to match. I wouldn't be too mad at that if I was a Raptors fan. You get a young guard who could back up your rotation, and someone like Dwight Powell, who, although his contract is overpriced, don't get me wrong, as a backup center, you could do a lot worse than that. You could do a lot worse than having him, Kem Birch, Precious Achiuwa, and we may as well talk about Precious while we're at it as well. I like that as well. You're a team that needed a backup center. I said the biggest move was Kyle Lowry getting traded and Scottie Barnes, the two biggest moves. Well, it wasn't, because you waived Aaron Baines. I can't blame you. I can't blame you. I mean, but he served a purpose. He literally helped you get the top 4 pick. Like, Aaron Baines himself was a huge help. Also, moving to an entire different country, an entire different state. A few little minor things happened, Aaron Baines and moving to a different country. I really don't know what was more impactful for the negative reasons, but he's now gone. He is waived. So you needed someone as some depth. Freddie Gillespie is cool. They've still got him. Kem Birch re-signed. I like that re-signing. I think he's a solid center that you could do a lot worse than Kem Birch. And you can always move on from him. It's a very movable contract. And then Precious Achiuwa, who I like. I think he'll be a nice backup guy. He's got energy. He's got a motor. He can defend multiple positions. He's versatile. And he provides some offense. I think he will be nice from the jump. He played about 12 minutes a game last year for the Heat, averaged like 5 points. He was solid, and I expect him to continue to be solid with the Raptors' development. He fits the kind of mold of the Raptors players with those high motors that are going to be defensively versatile. So Achiuwa makes sense, and I like that trade. Farewell to Kyle Lowry, but unfortunately, Raptors fans, you have to move on. Well, you don't have to. I'm not the boss of you, but I would advise moving on, because I think you've got a nice young core, if I'm being honest, and the young core, I guess, starts now with Scottie Barnes and obviously some other guys as well. But let's just talk about Barnes, because this is a little bit of a surprising pick to some. I wasn't too surprised, because I thought Masai had something up his sleeve. I thought it was too simple for him to take the obvious pick. He obviously had to go against the grain, and Barnes was kind of against the grain, even though a lot of people had him at 5. So it wasn't exactly a huge riser. But to go for Scottie Barnes, there was rumors about Jalen Suggs having a bad workout, all of that stuff. We'll just talk about the positives of Barnes. Straight away, if you're looking at trying to build an identity, the Raptors have been a great defensive team for a long time. I mean, last year was an aberration, but bringing in Barnes with OG, Pascal, Freddie, Gary Trent Jr., numerous guys that have actually been number 1 defenders on their team. Gary Trent Jr. was a number 1 guy in the bubble for the Portland Trail Blazers, who weren't a great defense, but still number 1 defender regardless. You had OG Anunoby, who was obviously the number 1 stopper, and Scottie Barnes was the number 1 stopper for his team in college, and I expect him to do similar things at the NBA level, because we may as well talk about the positives. Enough beating around the bush. Scottie Barnes, straight off the bat, when you're 6'9" with those kind of intangibles, and you have the IQ, the work ethic, the hustle, the motor, the intelligence, which I said IQ, all of those factors, the intangibles, how is he not going to be a good defender? He's got the athleticism, the foot speed. That's what you need to be a good defender. You need to be able to consistently go out there and want to defend. And there were plays in college where he would maybe score, fall down, and then get back, run straight back down to the other end of the floor and defend. So he loves to defend. He loves to defend. He prides himself on it. He can guard multiple positions. You throw him in there with OG and Pascal and even Gary Trent Jr., who can guard different positions as someone who's probably going to be the two, guarding twos, threes, and maybe even fours on occasions. You have versatile defenders all across the board. You love to see it. You love to see it. So defensively, getting back to being a great defense is really on the horizon with Scottie Barnes to add to the mix of already good defenders they have. Fred VanVleet, their smallest guy, but can still defend really, really well. Don't underestimate him as a defender. They've got tons of good defenders. This is no different. So Barnes, all those intangibles you have. He's also a good passer. He's intelligent on both ends of the floor. He does have upside as a finisher because he can get to the rim. He can screen and roll. He can dribble handoff. There's going to be some promise for him with Gary Trent Jr., Fred VanVleet as guys who will dribble handoff, screen and roll, pick and roll, all of those things. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be exciting. I don't expect him to come in and dominate from the day jump because he seems like someone who's more of a high ceiling kind of guy who will take some time, but also impact the team in a way from the start. But I don't expect him to come in and dominate, particularly when you're behind Pascal Siakam, who hasn't been traded at this point, even though there have been rumors, OG and whatnot. So he's not going to come in and start, but he can make an impact from day one. And then looking at the negatives, the clear negatives are obviously his shooting, just his finishing and his scoring in general seem to be the biggest negatives around Barnes, because if you can't shoot, you know that stuff. But I'll just talk about the positives, because if you're Toronto, you trust your development. If you're a Toronto fan, you trust your development. You trust these are the same guys that turned Pascal Siakam into a star. OG Anunoby is about to be a star. Fred VanVleet, all of these guys. Now, this came from those guys being willing to work, and you have to understand that Toronto know what guys are willing to work. I think that's why Barnes really stood out to them, because everything I've heard about him is he is someone that is definitely willing to work. He's a student of the game, all of those kind of cliche lines, but he does get those cliche lines more than most other players, if any other player, if you know what I'm trying to say. So he clearly fits that mold, and if they believe he fits that mold and he's going to be able to do that, then shooting is definitely something you can improve. I mean, you've seen it from your own players, Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, the list goes on and on. Aaron Baines went the other way, but Scottie Barnes is no Aaron Baines. He's definitely not no Aaron Baines. How did I bring Aaron Baines back into it? I guess, yeah, whatever. Scottie Barnes is no Aaron Baines. He's someone that wants to work on his game. He's someone that I believe can get to become a good shooter, or at least an average shooter as time goes on. And you're banking on your development system. You're banking on his work ethic and all of those things, because if he becomes a good shooter with the intangibles I mentioned, with the defense, the 1 through 5, at the very least, he's going to be a good defender. He could be a great defender with his communication skills and everything he provides on that end of the floor. Well, then all of a sudden you're getting someone who is going to be fantastic. So back in your development, just back in your development. That's all I would say. I've seen people rate Scottie Barnes as the top 4 prospect that he went as, the top 3 prospect for some people, and some people had him in the teens. So it's polarizing. I don't do enough on the draft to know exactly where I'd rank him, but I trust the Raptors more than I trust myself, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to trust in Masai. I'm going to trust in his decision-making and everyone in that Raptors organization to get the best out of Barnes. That's what I'm expecting. So I'm expecting him to be a good pick. I like how he fits the team as well, getting back to just being a really, really good defensive team. That's what I want to see Toronto be, because that is where their bread and butter is going to be, just clamping up. And we may as well talk about other guys that are going to be doing some clamping. I mentioned it before, Freddie VanVleet, although he's small, he can clamp. Gary Trent Jr., Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, Ken Birch is far from a bad defender. That's more than likely going to be the starting 5 with Malachi Flynn, who took a jump in the second half of the season and impressed. He was someone I really liked coming out of the draft. He's someone who's a sure ball handler. He's a good decision maker. He can run the pick and roll as well. He can hit those mid-range shots. He can shoot the 3 off the dribble. He's still got some road to improve, but I really like the leap he took, and he seems like he's consistently getting better. I expect him to be a solid role player, at the very least, in the NBA. Goran Dragic, as I mentioned, will that be a Brunson? Will that be anyone? I expect them to sell him, I would imagine, but who knows? Who really knows? At the very least, Goran Dragic is going to be a very impactful player off the bench, and he would help your playoff push, which I don't know if you need him to be a playoff team. I'll talk about that right now. I expect the Raptors to be a playoff team. There are just a number of teams that I expect them to be better than. You've got a great coach. You've got guys who have been on a winning team. They lost so many close games last year that they just lost a lot of close games, which they easily could have made the playoffs. They had injuries. They, moved to a different country. Aaron Baines, as I said, all of those things. They're going to improve. Yes, they lost Lowry, but I do think they can replace him with Van Vliet, with Trent Jr., with Flynn coming off the bench, maybe Dragic or Brunson or anyone of that note. I believe they've got enough there. And then you look across the board, OG should take a leap. Pascal's going to consistently be good. Kem Birch. You get the point. This is a team that should be a playoff team. They're going to pride themselves on defense again, and I think they've got enough offense there as well to win enough games. With a good coach, with experience winning, I expect them to be back at the top unless they want to just go full-on development, which doesn't really seem like happening because Siakam's still on the team. All of those guys are still on the team. Talking about the Trent Jr. signing, I like it. He's 22 years of age, 3 years, $54 million. He fits the timeline with the likes of OG. I see OG as the kind of litmus test, is that the word for the timeline? He's the guy that I'd be looking at because, in my opinion, most potential in this team, the guy who's going to lead this team forward. I guess you could say Scottie Barnes as well now. So I expect those three to kind of be the guys that you measure in terms of the direction of the team. Siakam and Van Vliet are great players, don't get me wrong, but I'd expect those guys to be on the same timeline. So to have Gary Trent Jr., Scottie Barnes, Malachi Flynn, and OG Anunoby with the other second-round picks, and to have Banton and Johnson, who I don't know anything about. I'm going to be completely transparent, but I also do trust the Raptors to find a steal in the second round. I know the guy from Toronto, Banton, has a really, really Canadian accent. I heard him in an interview, so shout out to him. Homegrown kids can never go wrong with that, can you? So you could add them into the rotation at some point in time because Toronto will just probably inevitably make it work. Just getting back to Trent Jr. for a second, I know I'm jumping all over the place, but this is someone who took a huge leap. In the bubble last year, on paper, it looks like he took the huge leap this year, but it was actually in the bubble, which was kind of this year. It's messed up. The world is messed up. We know that. But he took a huge leap regardless. He was pretty good in Toronto. Wasn't at his best, but I think he'll get back to his best. He's someone who's been like a career 40% shooter. He takes multiple attempts a game. He's going to help with Scottie Barnes and those guys, Pascal Siakam, with the dribble handoffs, doing all of those things. He can shoot off the dribble. He can shoot off the catch, high volume, high efficiency shooter that can guard multiple positions. He's only going to get better. He's 22. The Raptors development system, 3 years, $54 million is absolutely not too much money for someone like Trent Jr. I like the deal. I like the signing. It makes sense. He fits the timeline. OG, I've talked about him in depth. I don't really need to get into him. He's going to be a star. He kind of already is getting into that star level with his 1-5 defense, plus his improving offense. Particularly the second half of the season, you saw his offense even continue to improve. I expect that to continue to happen. I just like what Toronto have got going on. I don't think there's ever been a point in time where I've looked at Toronto and been like, yeah, I don't like what you've got going on. At least since I've been kind of watching. I know beforehand they weren't quite exactly the team that they are now, the organization that they are now. But Masai Ujiri, he just re-signed as well, did he not? I believe he did. Nick Nurse, all of those guys. Scottie Barnes, let's see what they do this year. I expect them to be a playoff team. Other than that, hope you enjoyed the video.